All right, thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm going to let Bryan introduce himself. Bryan, why don't you kick start it for us and then hand it over to me, and then we will go from there.
Sure. Could you go to the next slide, please, Max? Yeah, just a brief disclaimer. Yes, I am an attorney by trade, and just so you know, the materials that are provided herein and the discussion that we're about to have today is not intended to be legal advice. If you have specific facts or questions, those should be addressed by your regular attorney. Next slide. And just an introduction of myself. So I started my career as a JAG in the Air Force in 2001. Loved it, enjoyed my career. Then spent about almost 14 years at a division of General Dynamics as a deputy general counsel. I was focused on government contracts, and I was also the director of the contracts group at the division. Currently, I have my own law practice, a consulting practice, and I serve as a general counsel and COO for a medium-sized defense contractor. And my specialty is and always has been government contracts and commercial transactions. Max?
Thank you so much, Bryan. I'd like to thank everybody for attending. My background is similar to Bryan, except that I started in the U.S. Air Force as a security specialist. I kind of worked my way up and was basically brought in after 9/11. Loved the U.S. Air Force experience. After leaving, I started working with the Department of Defense, primarily on areas called certification and accreditation, which a lot of the theme of CMMC is borrowed from those kinds of things. And then I started to help a lot of small businesses as well as large businesses on helping them with just general technology risk with a focus on cybersecurity. So many times I'm serving as a CTO or a CISO. And today we have brought in Ignyte as one of the AI-enabled risk management software that's helping automate accreditation work, but as well as CMMC across the board for many different clients. So that's a little bit about myself. Kind of shifting over to what are some of the items we'll be discussing today. So when we think about the CMMC nightmare, how that is happening and continue to happen, and how we are waking up from it, these are some of the things we'll cover. We'll cover basics of what CMMC is. We won't go into great detail. However, if you did want details, the presentations are attached. We'll talk about the relationship between the DFARS rules and specifically 171 or NIST 800-171, and along with the relationship of CMMC. A lot of these things go together, so we want to talk about those. And then Bryan will help me kind of determining the right level, factors for cost, as well as what is the right level. We get this question a lot. Do I need to be level 1, 2, or 3? And how do you determine that? And what are some of the practices around it? And then, just from both business standpoint and, advice from Bryan on what are some of the impacts of non-compliance, right? We do hear a lot of executives say, hey, I'm just going to not do this, right? What are some of the consequences of non-compliance after some of these rules and stipulations come into effect? And then I'm going to hand it over to Bryan for really diving deep into some of the lessons that he has learned working through with CEOs, as well as cybersecurity practitioners, procurement professionals, all sorts of different professionals on what it takes to implement CMMC. So that's kind of the broad areas of discussion today. Hold your questions till the end. Definitely want to get to all of those questions, but these are some of the areas that we'll be touching. So starting with CMMC maturity model, kind of the overview. So essentially, CMMC is, you could say in a way, in a simplest way, is to formalize what is already in the DFARS rule into a certification of some sort. There have been several drafts that have been released. A lot of those drafts lean heavy on the original content that came out of a documentation called NIST 171 or 800-171. So a lot of the methodology, on how you're supposed to do the assessment, what you're supposed to be assessing. CMMC leans entirely on 171, and it has the authority and the backing from the actual DFARS rule. It really concerns itself. The reason why this came out is because the DoD is interested in protecting what's known as FCI and CUI, federal contract information and controlled unclassified or uncontrolled unclassified information. So later on, we'll talk about where can you get training, official training about CUI, and really a lot of these things come down through flow down requirements. If you're a subcontractor on a multi-tier supply chain of some sort. So that's a very basic kind of a background of CMMC. There is a timeline, and it's a moving timeline. So as you can see, in October 2019, the government, the DoD, released an RFI, which is request for information, to really launch what's known as the accreditation body. If we go back even further before this, there was another DFARS rules that was released around 2015 timeframe, kind of saying, hey, you need to follow cybersecurity practices, and a lot of them were taken out of NIST 171. So a lot of those themes are continuing, and this timeline isn't complete. It only goes up to June of 2020. Since that time, there has been multiple changes. We saw that there's new testing. So some of these things that you see, level 1, 2, 3 guides, those were in a draft phase. Now we actually have some guides that are finalized, and model development itself is being finalized as well. So this is very much a moving target. We're tracking it. But again, time and time, what we see is that when there are questions on what to do and how to go about it, the government tends to lean heavy on what the NIST specifications state. And CMMC is really built on that. So let's look at kind of the, what are some of the differences? What does that relationship look like, and things like that? So in CMMC, you have this concept of practices and processes. There are 20. There's additional practices and additional maturity processes. In the NIST 800-171, those same sort of practices and processes are known as requirements. Sometimes they call them controls. So in totality, NIST has about 130, and then CMMC drafted additional 20, right? So as you can see, 90% of the content is coming out of NIST 171. And the DFARS requirements really point back to NIST 171. So, my thought is, a lot of people ask us, hey, what do we need to do to get CMMC compliant? The real answer is right now, things are moving really fast. We should just really focus on 110, NIST controls. That if you focus on those, you should be able to hit your in level 3 of where CMMC is. So that's kind of the difference between the two. There is also difference in philosophy here. Don't want to get into too much of a philosophical discussion, but the NIST 171 requires kind of a binary response. Are you doing this? Yes or no. Whereas CMMC has levels and has a conversational tone. So how do you reconcile the two? How do you respond to the government with both yes and no, and a statement, a conversational statement, which is essentially a maturity model conversation? How good do you think you are? Those things are still being hashed out by the authors of CMMC. And as we start to see more guidance on what standard SSP looks like, what a standard POAM looks like, that will start to provide us a little bit more content and color. So CMMC very much in the flux in terms of how to conduct yourself accordingly. We lean heavy towards NIST 171, Rev 1 and Rev 2 because that has been fleshed out and it's been contested. There's been a lot of input into it. Still waiting for some of those inputs into CMMC. So, a lot of this, again, is from a cybersecurity practitioner, right? We have cyber CISOs and information security officers. They really take on some of the bulk of this, but this is where you need a little bit of input from an attorney, a specialist that really focuses on DFARS rule. So the DFARS rule that really impact this are these four, right? They are specifically laid out that call out 171. There have been amendments to the rule, interim rules that call out CMMC. Again, some of this is, some of these rules are in draft guidance, but many of them are actually approved. I'm going to pause here because I think it's important. This is why Bryan is here, to kind of help us understand the impact of these rules from a flow down perspective. So Bryan, can you add a little bit of content about and color around these four rules? Do you see any other rules coming out? And then how are some of these being interpreted, to comply with these rules?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Max. So a couple of things on these rules. First of all, the rules are highly technical when you look at them, and then you look at the underlying regulations and NIST documents that underlie them. When they're telling you what to do, you have to go to the NIST documents and then the CMMC requirements as well. And you would think a technical rule like this would be something that, okay, you would just read it and you would say, okay, this is what it says we need to do, go and do it. But it's a lot more nuanced than that. Max talked, first of all, about the philosophical difference between CMMC and NIST. And one of them that I think it's missed a little bit is the NIST was more of a requirement to do things and then report on what you're doing, whereas CMMC is set up to much more in terms of, don't just tell me you're doing something, show me you're doing something and show me how you are doing it. So that's the conversational piece that Max was talking about. And then there is this requirement to interpret things that is multidisciplinary. So when you're reading through the rules, it's one thing to read something that says do X, like for example, have a firewall system in place that is X certified or whatever. But it's another thing when you have to turn around and purchase technology or put processes in place that meet those requirements. And there is interpretation that goes into each and every one of those controls. For example, the Microsoft compliance tool has a template in there for NIST 800-171, all of the controls, and it itself has its own interpretations of what meets each one of those controls. And if you compare that interpretation, which Microsoft is measuring you against their own standard, but which they call NIST 800-171, if you compare those things with, say, the NIST 800-171 assessment guide, the wording is not the same, but the underlying regulation that they're looking at is the same. So having a conversation that includes a CISO, your IT group, perhaps even an attorney, but having a cyber consultant is very beneficial when you're trying to interpret all of these four rules. Now, as to what's coming out next, I do not see anything else coming out, under 7012 soon, but I do see that, as CMMC gets refined, that CMMC clause that's going to require certification, that itself, of course, will be included and updated in the near future this year. So,
Bryan, thank you for adding that. Absolutely. This requires a multidisciplinary approach. There's multiple types of interpretation. There's both administrative, technical, and also physical. So there's three types of controls, right? And a lot of this requires interpretation by both IT side and cybersecurity side. We lean heavy on input from the regulatory side because that's comes down through flow down requirements and things like that. So I believe it's a team support to kind of figure this part out at least this stage of the game. The next question we kind of get is, what are these CMMC levels? What do I have to do? What level is it right for my business? So essentially,
Max,
Yes.
Sorry. Before you go into this, do you mind if I ask the first polling question?
Sure, go right ahead.
All right. My leadership and management is aware of these new rules, and we have an engagement at the business level for this initiative. And just a reminder that if you are wanting CLE or CPE credit, you do need to participate in each of these questions. But you do not have to get it correct, although this isn't really a right or wrong, is it? Give this one another 10 seconds. All right. And share the results. We have 86% saying yes, non-IT leadership is involved with the decision making. 10% B, no, all decisions are being made by IT. And 4%, this does not apply to my company. And then I'll hand things back to you, Max.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Susie, for getting those questionnaires out. So one of the critical, things about getting this done right is absolutely you need business leadership involved. If you're driving this from a bottom-up approach, just IT only, the progress that you may make is not going to be sustainable, right? So having a conversation with the business leadership, legal input, risk management, audit departments, depending on how your business is structured, you need a multidisciplinary approach, and those are some of the things that Bryan was touching on. So the next area is about the CMMC levels. A lot of people are curious about what are these levels, what do they mean, which level do I have to comply with? So just to kind of start with, the CMMC in itself has 5 levels. When you look at the NIST documentation, earlier I said, hey, go with NIST. This is one of the difference between the two. In NIST documentation, there are no such things as levels. On the CMMC side, they have this idea of maturity levels. Most of the businesses, so you can, you'll have a lot of this information. You can read through what are some of the 15 safeguard requirements that point to this specific bar clause, and then the 65 requirements that point, is a subset of 171. Most of the businesses today are leaning towards level 3. This is what we have seen. Now, some businesses do come to us. They're very small. They're like, hey, we don't really do much business with the government. Can we just do level 1 only? In my read and my opinion, a lot of this work is going to be around level 3 of what you need, because that is really going to set you up for success in terms of doing business with the defense. We're still waiting on clarity and guidance on what does level 2 and 1 entail that is different than level 3. If the requirements point, sometimes the requirement points only to 171 and it doesn't call out the 65 requirements. And a lot of people are doing 110 controls. And so a lot of times what we advise clients is to take a look at the level 3 as your baseline requirement and then build from there, right? And the way these levels work is that if you're doing level 3, it includes everything within level 2 and 1. And in order to kind of determine what is right for your business, this requires a bit of consultation. But as a general rule of thumb, we believe that most customers are going to fall within level 3. That's sort of the expected level for the DoD. The other thing I have seen is that the guidance in itself that was released by CMMC-AB, the test guidance, the test cases, they really focused on level 3 as one of the first things that they released. They have not really worked on level 4 and 5 even yet, right? They first started to target level 3. Again, there are these basic requirements, such as level 1 is just for basic hygiene to protect FCI. But when you really look at these and dig deeper into interpreting a lot of the practices, things, they start to really push towards a higher level of maturity. I'm going to ask Bryan, as my colleague here, to chime in. Bryan, what have you seen out there? what is kind of the high level process that you might go through in determining what might be the right level, and what is some of the guidance that you might have seen out there that helps some of the smaller businesses determine what level they should be pursuing at?
Sure. So first thing is to just know the business, know what kind of stuff that the business is doing. And, for a CMMC level 1 or 2, you might be thinking about a business that is doing maintenance work around a military installation or something like that, but is not selling defense articles to the Department of Defense, defense articles or defense services. But for the most part, most DoD contractors are shooting for level 3. And the reason for that is, as Max pointed out, most of the focus has been on level 3. It's closest to the NIST. It's closest to what companies have been shooting for already and what the expectation has been. And then in level 4 and 5, we'll see how those totally shake out. They are additive to level 3. So if you get to level 3, you don't have to undo what you did. You just have to add things. And I will say that when you look at the controls for level 4 and 5 as they've been produced to date, they can be cumbersome and very costly and can change the way business operates. Shooting for level 3, I think, is a smart business decision. I mean, unless you need a 4 or 5 because you're in, missile defense or something like nuclear weaponry or something like that, I would recommend shooting for level 3 to start with, and that's what most companies are doing.
Yeah. Any additional requirements you might have if you're working in a specialized area, you'll have additional flow down requirements off of a DD 254 contract, things like that. And at those times, we might start to see activity around level 4 and 5, but there's still a lot of haze, a lot of unclarity. However, the way they have worded these things, it will require the organization to get in a continuous monitoring rhythm of some sort, and it can be very cumbersome. Bryan, thank you for your input. Absolutely, business input is critical in terms of determining, what level you need to be at. The next area we want to touch on is some of the resources that are available to you. In addition to webinars like this, what are some of the guidance that's out there that's somewhat authoritative? There's a lot of, I hear constantly, there's a lot of, misinformation about, hey, you can get CMMC certified today, right? That's not the case. So we kind of compiled basic resources and level of effort from what we understand and what the DoD has presented us so far. So there are resources available depending on where you are in the whole process, right? Initially, you need to do some sort of awareness and training at the senior management level, not only at the practitioner level, but really your management needs to be aware. What are the cost factors? What does it take to get into the DoD business? Or it could be, hey, I'm already in. What are some of the things that I need as a qualification, right? An additional qualification. So there's training, there's a guided assessments, and then there are some hard deliverables that you're going to need, known as the SSP and the POAM, that stands for System Security Plan and a Plan of Action and Milestone. And then later on, there are program metrics and overall management. So one of the areas is just the DoD website, right? The DoD has published a training on what is CUI. That does require not only interpretation but applicability to your business. So you're provided that link, and then the next area is really around, how do you get training from that's a little bit more management centric. So Ignyte Institute, if you just go to www.ignyteinstitute.org, a lot of this training was developed as part of a DoD grant to help senior management understand within 20 minutes of less, really how to develop a management agenda, how do you get your team together, and how can you drive this from a programmatic perspective versus kind of a bottom-up perspective. And then after you've gone through the CMMC senior management course, we do recommend taking a practitioner level course. It's a basic 60 minutes, 1 hour self-paced learning. And then we would want you to supplement that with what is CUI, right? Because a lot of this really falls on, protecting this information, right? Information that lives on all sorts of different technology assets. And having that exercise up front on how do we define data, what is a data classification policy, what is our strategy with data classification, those are some of the first things you'll be doing. And it's important for you to, get training directly from the DoD on how they define what CUI is and how do you recognize CUI, how do you properly mark CUI. Those are very important things that will have to be implemented. The remainder of the resources, if I just back up a slide, the remainder of the resources, it's not allowing me to back up, but that's okay. The remainder of the resources, you'll have the links for. We provided the actual authoritative NIST 171 documentation, where you might be able to find that, as well as we developed a resource out there called dfars-nist-171.com. It gives you sample SSP, sample poems, things that you can actually do yourself after you've been trained. You can start to kind of look at those things and start to make some progress. And all of these things are very important for you to internalize, regardless of if you have a consultant or not. One of the things we do as consultants is actually make you go through some basic level of awareness and training, at least at the management level, so that we can do this properly. So the next area is kind of around level of effort, right? What is the cost of compliance and what is the level of effort? How do we get to those numbers? What are some of the numbers we're seeing out there? And what might you see out there as you start to develop this for your company? So, we break down cost of compliance into three areas, into three buckets. So if you're trying to right size this whole thing, your management is really interested in is total cost of ownership, right? They don't just want to know about the firewall. They don't want to just know about some paperwork. They really want to understand what is the total cost of ownership. What is it going to take for me to do this from end to end? And so we break down these cost factors into three areas. Number one is kind of program management and program development. This is an oversight component, right? Whether that cost is external or internal, there's a real cost to account for if you're getting your leadership involved. It's their time, as well as maybe time of an external consultant. This is some of the upfront work that it takes to set the kind of the management and the program of CMMC for the entire company. The second bucket is technology and engineering. Now, we've seen a lot of teams just jump right into buying a new server, buying a new firewall, without really setting the program management side of this first. We caution you against this. We'll talk about it here in a minute, but that's the second area. You will have cost of technology. You may need solutions like encryption. You may need two-factor authentication, things like that. So that's a real cost that should be accounted for. And then the third is audit and certification. This is going to be done by entities known as C3PAOs, certified third-party organizations. Right now, there's about, I think, about 60 to 70 provisional assessors. They're not finalized yet. So this is the third bucket of cost, right? Program development, technology, and audit. What I will say is that you should plan this in this way, because if you're setting up the program and scoping things correctly for your business, it should help you control the cost of technology. Many times we have seen that a lot of businesses are starting with the technology first and not really allowing the business to scope. Maybe there's a different federal division, right? Not really letting the business scope of what technology should be certified and cleared. This is formally known as an authorization boundary. And so if you set up the program correctly, your technology costs should drop. And the audit side, it's easier to critique, I always tell my customer, than it is to create. So if you're doing all the right things, verification and validation of all of these things should be somewhat manageable as well. So today we're seeing pricing anywhere from $20,000 to $200,000. It all depends on your technology scope and your business scope. These are the primary three categories or factors of how to determine that cost. But you really could have a complex environment that really really challenges these numbers. On the top right, I'm going to blow this up. Federal, the DoD has done some sort of a business impact, analysis of what is going to be the annual cost. Again, for level 3, right, you're looking at about $60,000 of total annual cost. Now, how that breaks out, there's a lot of dependency on different things. I know Bryan has gone through a lot of this himself, so I'm gonna let him add a little bit of context here in terms of what he has seen as he's consulting out there and helping out different clients. Bryan, can you add anything about cost and what the business should project in terms of total cost and how they should go about figuring this piece out?
Sure. Yeah, the first thing I would say is there needs to be a mindset change when thinking about this project, okay? So this is not and cannot be thought of as simply an IT exercise with you buy technology, you plug it in, you install it, and you're good to go. That's not what CMMC is. That's not what cybersecurity is. It needs to be thought of more in terms of a cost of doing business, an ongoing program. This is not something that you're going to pay, $50,000 over the course of 6 months and things will be done and you can just go on. This is should be thought of more in terms of this is information security, cybersecurity being a part of it. And it's a different discipline than simply information technology department that is keeping your systems up to date and keeping your systems working. System security is a different discipline. So I would say these numbers are quite a bit, I think, on the low side. Having just for my own company, I have one company that just has 3 computers, and that one in and of itself, just in technology and licenses, it probably cost us $20,000. So anything from that to a large company, I would say, you could run into the $250,000 a year up front. And then you have to budget for things like an IT security department. You need to have a person, a CISO, whether you're outsourcing that to a company that does it on a fractional basis, or if you're large enough, having that department run in-house. The other thing I would say is that technology will change and requirements will change. So you need to budget for continuous improvement, just like anything else that's a program within your organization. You can't stay stagnant. You have to continuously improve. And with the mindset change being we are protecting information going forward, that has to be run like a program, and continuous improvement needs to be a part of that and budgeted for.
Thank you so much, Bryan, for the input there. Absolutely. This is why it's so critical to get the leadership involved, so it's not thought of as a one-time project. We get it done and then we go worry about other things. This is the reason for continuing pressure and update of regulation, because back in 2015 we had seen that the DoD had released a DFARS rule that basically said do your NIST 171. A lot of people took that as hey, I'll submit or I'll have my results and that's it. There's no continuous effort to improve, to protect the supply chain. And now we're starting to see a lot of these things around program management and program letting the program drive the success of information security and cybersecurity with it. So what are some of the impacts to the businesses? Non-compliance risk. We do talk to a lot of different people that are simply saying, hey, I'm not going to do this, or we're not going to do this until we absolutely have to. So these are some of the major impacts that we see. First and foremost, we got to step back and say, why do we even, are called to do this, right? Why is the government asking everybody to do this? They not only, the government doesn't really just care for CUI and FCI. Those are some of the nomenclature that gets assigned to this, but really it's your intellectual property. If you're a business that has engineering drawings on how you build something. You have a very unique process. That is key to protect for not only the DoD reasons, but really for competitive purposes, right? You don't want anybody to get access to your engineering drawings, your pricing, how you're selling, what you're selling, who you're selling it to, right? So a lot of this has to do with helping you reduce internal breach, those kinds of things. Now, there is a requirement to report to the DoD on a website called DibNet within 72 hours of an actual incident, right? But that's one of the major impacts, is that if you don't do this, you will face some sort of a cybersecurity incident. It's just a matter of time. I haven't really seen a business that hasn't faced this sort of incident today, not in 2021. The second area is really, if you delay this, a lot of this, what we account for is something called tech debt. You're decreasing the quality and really effectiveness of your current technology. A lot of times IT companies just throw tools to make it work, which is great, help the business go fast. But if you don't have the opposite side of a car, which is a brake pedal and an accelerator, you're really implementing technology in a risky manner, right? So that creates more efficiency problems or effectiveness problems, as well as quality. So a lot of these things are reasons why you would want to do this. And then, of course, I'm going to let Bryan cover this, and then he's going to dive right into the lessons learned. Really, it comes down to flow down requirements and a potential loss of revenue. Bryan, what have you seen, in terms of, as an attorney, looking at the flow down requirements? What kind of impact can a business see if they decide to, ignore a requirement that's coming down?
Sure. Yeah. So the contract requirement is these cybersecurity clauses, 7012 and others, are absolute requirements for doing business with the Department of Defense. The only exception that's out there right now is if you are selling exclusively, the only thing that you're going to sell is commercial off-the-shelf items, not commercial items, but commercial off-the-shelf, which has its own specific definition. So you will find yourself, and your subcontractors will find themselves literally unawardable if they do not comply with the cybersecurity flow down clauses that are coming through in the contracts. Why? Because the Department of Defense is making this a threshold issue. There is literally a hot war going on right now in the world, where countries are battling each other in the cyberspace, and protection of information is paramount right now. So what are those requirements? Why am I saying that? Well, because it's a threshold issue, and it is something that is a requirement for award, if you do not follow it, and then you turn around to the government and you submit a request for payment from the government, which will say that you have complied with the terms of the contract, but you haven't, then there's False Claims Act liability there, potential. So that's not good. So you want to avoid that. And then the other main thing is loss of the data. This is information security. So if you send it to a subcontractor that's not compliant, and they then house CUI on their systems, and that CUI gets released, that's loss of data, and who knows what kind of financial impact that could cause you, or impact to national security. So next slide. Okay, so this is really the main point of why I wanted to be involved in this webinar. And I've been through several of these implementations, and I just want to share with everybody what I've learned from these implementations. I've done everything from something very small up to large as a consultant. And the number one thing I would say is, and it's been kind of foot stomped throughout, is implementation of these cyber controls is multidiscipline. If you rely on your IT department and your IT department only to run this program, and it needs to be thought of as a program, it will be much more difficult than if it's treated as a regular program underneath the business. It requires IT and IT security for sure. It requires human resources department being involved in both in the training aspect and in the security aspect of things. Physical security is a component of NIST and CMMC. Compliance and legal, for sure, to be looking at interpretations of the policies and procedures that are developed, and do they comply with what the technical requirement is. Business leadership. This program is going to have impacts on the operations, and business leadership needs to be involved to make those risk-based decisions as to, okay, if this is the scope of things I can do to comply, and this is the level of information we have, cost benefit, and this is how it's going to impact my business. A business person needs to make those decisions, not just the IT person, not just an engineer. Everyone needs to be involved to make risk-based decisions that are compliant. And so you need business leadership involved. And then, of course, the regular employees. This is going to be a change in mindset, and your employees, the employees in the business, need to change behavior, right? So this isn't just about technology. It's about how employees and people in the business behave with that technology, because you can have all the technology in the world, but if someone has a password that's password 1, that technology can be breached. If you have folks that don't use their mobile devices in a manner that is secure, all of the money that you spend on technology is worthless. But if you have employees who are well trained and act in terms of information security, that's the goal, then you will achieve the end result that's desired through the CMMC program. Next slide.
Before you jump into the next slide, could I do both of the last polling questions? Just get them out of the way. Okay.
Sure.
All right, here's the first one. Do I have to comply with DFARS Rule 252.204.7019 if I have done prior business with DoD? Give this one another 15 seconds. All right. We have 76% saying yes, we do, 12% no, we don't have to, and 12% not sure. And the last question. My company passes a self-assessment against NIST 800-171. Will we automatically meet all of the level 3 CMMC requirements? Fifteen seconds for this one. All right. This one we have 83% no, 10% not sure, and 6% yes. And then I'll hand things back over to you two.
Max, I can take it from here if you want to address those. Okay. Yeah, so just to address the two questions. So if you've done past business with the DoD, CMMC is really forward-looking. So it's required for business that has the requirement in the contract. You do have to comply with the NIST requirements, dating back to the 2016 clause. So that's really the answer there. And then the second one is, if you do comply with the NIST requirements, you will have complied with 110 of the 130 required controls of CMMC level 3. So you're almost there. And actually, it's a really short distance between NIST 800-171 and CMMC level 3, but you're not quite there. Just continuing on with the lessons learned. In doing the implementation project, I highly recommend that you get a quarterback or a project manager to manage it. And it should not be, in my humble opinion, it should not be the head of your IT department. It should be someone who is a trained program manager that will run the program just like anything else, with a budget, with cross-functional membership, with a schedule and a timeline, with decision-making authority within the team, so that success is not dependent strictly on what the IT department is going to do, but rather someone who's reporting to senior management, who has both the obligation to perform and the skill set to run a multidisciplinary program. Your implementation will go much more smooth than if you simply have your IT department running it. Think of this as, for those of you who are in a larger company and have installed an ERP system, while it's not as, I wouldn't say it's as large of a project, it is quite invasive of a project. Those types of projects, even ERP system implementations, typically you would want a program manager. So think of it more of akin to that than an IT project. So next slide. Other lessons learned. So the vendors that are out there are all new at this too. A lot of them pop up, man, they're experts, everything, all their marketing material says they're experts and they've been doing this a long time. But listen, CMMC, the controls just came out. And so, first of all, be patient with vendors, but also do your homework, understand what their background is. What is their background in cybersecurity, not just information technology, and what have they been doing to understand the technology that is out there that is there to meet the various controls. The next lesson learned is implementation is going to be viewed as a change in the company paradigm. So what is the mindset of the company and how does the company operate? So and it's going to impact people, processes, and your technology. So with the people, there needs to be a change in mindset that this is about information security. It's not simply the IT department installing virus protection and then everything is great. It's every person in the company has an obligation as part of their normal duties to protect information and to be vigilant and to watch what they click on, to change their behavior, what they talk about, what things they report and don't report. So the training is absolutely essential. With respect to processes, the processes for CMMC are going to look different than this because there has to be implementation of verifiable and auditable procedures. Again, there's this show me, don't just tell me mindset in CMMC. So the processes are going to have to produce auditable information trails and documentation and approval processes that will be implemented and imposed on employees. And so that's going to look different and it's going to change how things are done. I don't think it's super invasive, but I think it's necessary and it's a change for sure. As far as the technology that's being implemented, both the software and the hardware, requires more steps in verification than what most people are used to. So, for example, some of the Microsoft technology is out there. So when you have a document that needs to be marked as CUI or as confidential or whatever it needs to be marked as, there's there are buttons that you now have to push to mark the document as CUI, and then the technology puts controls around that document as to how it can get sent out, who it can get sent to, and how they can forward it. So that extra step that gets involved, that will be involved for sending emails and saving things, are just new things that people are going to have to get used to. So there's going to have to be a change in how things are done. Next slide. So researching the solutions to ensure they're compatible. One of the things that I've seen in several implementations is there's a patchwork of solutions that are out there to meet all of the controls. And a lot of them, they're great in and of themselves, but they may not play well with other things that you've decided to use as a solution to another technology. So when you're talking to vendors, when your IT department or your CISO and your team is talking to vendors, tell them your architecture, what it is that you are going to use. Get a good NDA in place, but talk about what your architecture is going to be, and ask them if they've tested it in that environment. And if not, what do they know about whether it will work with, for example, Microsoft 365, or whether it will work in a Dynamics environment or some other ERP system. Find out if they've done that before. Otherwise, you could pay license fees and things just don't work well together. And the last thing I would say is this is not going away. Okay, I've had several clients who I've talked to, and their first position is, I'm going to hold off. This is a big expense, and I think it's just going to go away, so I'm just going to wait. Cybersecurity in one format or another is not going away. As I stated earlier, this is a real battle that's happening in cyberspace between our country and others. And it has to be won, and we have to protect our information, and the Department of Defense is going to do that. So it might look different going forward at some point. Can't promise CMMC level 3 is what everybody's going to need, or it's not going to change. But certainly ignoring it is not the answer unless you just do not want to do business with the Department of Defense. So next slide. I think that was my last one.
Yep, that's the summary side, Brian. I can cover this. We have a quick 5 minutes, so we're going to open it up for questionnaires. But yeah, research, right? Get certified vendors. There's a lot of hype out there. Make sure you kind of cross-check if they've done this before. Do they even have their own stuff certified to some degree, right? Developing a management leadership agenda. We keep coming back to that. And then when you're developing a total cost of ownership, look at it in 3 buckets: program management, technology changes, and then, of course, the audit piece that we'll learn more about as time goes on. And then Brian covered all of the lessons learned that from the trenches that he has seen and experienced with. So we'll pause here. We've got, like I said, about 5 minutes. We can take some questions if you have any, and we'll pass it back to Susie on the next part of this presentation.
All right. We did get some questions throughout. Brian, I sent those over to you. Do you by chance see a question section on your panel there? Otherwise, I can read the questions out loud.
I do not. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So first question we received was, is there a standard or universal definition of CUI, or is that definition unique to each DoD contractor?
I can take that question, Max. That's a good question. For a long time, people have been at, how do you know what is CUI and what is the definition of CUI? Yes, there is a definition of CUI, and it's massive, okay? So DoD, the 7012 clause in it refers to what's called covered defense information, which is CDI, and it has its own definition, which is covered technology, I think is the term of it. Really what that is any defense drawing or document that has a distribution statement on it other than distribution A, plus CUI, which is defined by the National Archives. And if you look at the what is CUI training module produced by the DoD, it goes through all of the categories of what is included in CUI. So it is anything there's a whole list of categories that runs from technical information to export controlled information to personally identifiable information like name and social security numbers to OPSEC information. So information like on a DoD contract that is protected under an OPSEC plan or identified as OPSEC sensitive, that would fall under it as well. But there's a long list that the National Archives puts out that I would just go and do a search online for National Archives CUI website, and it will show you all of those categories. But in general, I would say it's a very broad definition.
Okay, and looks like we have room for one more here. Are these courses listed here free? So I'm assuming that's based on a previous slide.
Yep. Bryan, I can take that one. So these courses are free for time being. You take a look at, Ignyte Institute. There are a couple of courses on there that we allow you to enter for free for your management and your practitioner. And the DoD course, it's free for everybody, right? We recommend you take that as a baseline, which covers really what Bryan was talking about, but in much greater detail. What is CUI? That one is free as well. You get a certificate out of both of those courses. So absolutely, those are free courses, a resource available to you. Both of those are really funded by the government, right? To some degree, the DoD course itself, and then also the courses under the Ignyte Institute are also funded by the DoD as well, under a contract.
All right, wonderful. So unfortunately, we've run out of time. Any of the questions that we weren't able to get to during the session will be sent over to both Bryan and Max for their review to answer after the fact. And if you do think of any other questions, you can feel free to email myself at suzy@fedpubseminars.com, and I can send them over, or I assume that email is another way to get a hold of you, Max?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.